Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, during which we are going to discuss design thinking for targeting necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas, a human-centered approach. Rural areas in Lebanon continue to record the highest percentages of unemployment and vulnerability, particularly among youth. In an attempt to navigate these hardships, entrepreneurship has presented itself as a way out of adversity. Driven by necessity, these self-made entrepreneurs have a strong will to succeed, but may lack the adequate skills and tools to make it. Against this background, we aim in this webinar to introduce the design thinking concept to assess the implementation of possible recommendations that support NDEs in rural areas in Lebanon, and to integrate the problem-solving skills into the work of municipalities to enhance the services they provide, particularly to NDEs. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Lina Maddah. I am the economic researcher here at LCPS. I have worked on different publications, mainly the one related to the impact of the crisis on necessity-driven entrepreneurs. I hold a PhD in economics from Universidad Rovira i Virgili in Spain. Before introducing our distinguished speakers, I would like to notify you that simultaneous interpretation is available. You can activate it by pressing on the translation button in the bottom of the screen. ألفت انتباهكم أنه باستطاعتكم تشغيل خاصية الترجمة الفورية من الإنجليزية إلى العربية من خلال الضغط على الزر المشغل في أسفل الشاشة. So our discussion with the speakers will last for around 1 hour. Questions can be submitted in a written form in the chat box at the bottom right corner of the screen. Unless specified, I will choose the speaker to whom I will address the question. A recorded version of this webinar will be available on LCPS Facebook page. Of course, today's webinar wouldn't have been possible without the collective effort of our team here at LCPS, so I would like to thank the Center for International Private Enterprise SIPE, that is a supporter of the LCPS in this project. I thank our dear speakers who have been keen on sharing knowledge with the wider public and whom I am going to introduce now. Dr. Mona Aitani is an engineer, academic, and social entrepreneur. She completed her PhD in management from the University of Leicester and joined the Suleiman Olayan School of Business as a full-time assistant professor of entrepreneurship in 2021. She is also known for her community work in the field of women and technology empowerment, including mainly her role as the co-founder of Girls Got It and ex-chair of IEE Women in Engineering Affinity Group Lebanon section. Dr. Aitani founded Riyada for Social Innovation in 2017, and in 2020, she co-founded Shabab Lab, the first social innovation e-learning platform in the region. Dr. Nada Khash Subuh is a postdoctoral researcher at the Lebanese American University. She has more than 10 years of teaching experience in local and international universities. Dr. Nada's research is published in high-ranked and peer-reviewed international journals. She is a certified life and business master coach and currently an employability coach at the Nawaya Network. Dr. Nada believes in youth, and she believes that youth are the change makers, which is why she dedicates most of her time to empower youth by offering coaching, training, and development sessions. Laura Debian. Laura earned a master's degree in architecture from the Lebanese University. Laura is passionate about creation and design and has led collaborative efforts on several architectural projects since graduation. Laura is currently the program manager at Rural Entrepreneurs and leading the GIL program by UNICEF at Roof Lab. She is also an entrepreneurship training with several programs, including the Interpact with Tatweer Baladna NGO, funded by the US Embassy, and CREACT format to contribute to the growth of entrepreneurship in the Mediterranean. So I thank our speakers, and we start this webinar with Dr. Mona Aitani, who will be introducing us to design thinking and design thinking targeting mainly local policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lina, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today with you. I think this is a very important topic that we are tackling. And I really look forward for seeing some implemented projects based on today's webinar. I mean, I would like all of you, if you have any questions, maybe to type them in the chat while I speak. And I would happily take them later. Unfortunately, I can't stick around for the entire session because I have some work to do and I'm in the US, so it's morning here, and at 9 a.m., which is in around less than an hour, I have to be out to work. So I'm going to talk about design thinking, and as we said, it's a little bit more specific to our context, which is necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas. So I'll give you a general description of design thinking, general definition, but through the examples I will be giving, I will try to make it more specific to our for today. I hope you've heard of the term design thinking. I hope you've seen it around in different ways. And I will start with a definition from IDEO. IDEO is a design company based in the Silicon Valley, and they are very well known to be like avant-gardist, if you want to say, in terms of implementation of design thinking. And although they did not invent design thinking, but they definitely have publicized it and have popularized it, if you want to say. So according to Tim Brown, which is the executive chair of IDEO, he says that design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So a very important part of this definition that we need to focus on is the part that says human-centered approach. Okay, and going back to our title, we're talking about necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas. So if you want to apply design thinking for this kind of people or target group, it has to be a human-centered approach based on them, meaning that these people are at the center of everything we do when we apply design thinking. Okay, so this is the difference between design thinking and like the more traditional design approaches. When we talk about design, it's about coming up with a solution to a problem. And of course, when you come up with a solution, you have to design it basically. And this process says that whenever you do that, whenever you're trying to find a solution to any problem, you have to put the human at the center. Okay, and this is mainly why we like it so much, because it makes so much sense. If you're creating a solution to Mona, you have to think of Mona first before you actually come up with the solution. So let's look at the 5 steps of the process, and this will help us better understand what it entails and to actually apply it. So these 5 steps are based on the Stanford D School, which is actually the pioneer behind this whole design thinking process in our era. And these 5 steps are to empathize, first of all, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And I'm going to go through each one of them in details and explain it in the context of necessity-driven entrepreneurs. So again, this is how the process looks like. This diagram at the top of my screen is a very popular diagram when it comes to design thinking. If you Google, for example, Google search design thinking, this is probably the first thing you will get in terms of images. And again, you need to keep in mind that this is a user-centric approach. So at the center of this approach is the user, or the person, or the people, the group of people who we are concerned with. And again, what does this process allow us to do? It allows us to solve certain problems by prioritizing the consumer's needs above everything else. It relies on observing with empathy how people interact with their environments, and employs an iterative, hands-on approach to creating innovative solutions. Okay, so again, it's very much unlike traditional processes, whereas we know about a certain problem, we put lots of assumptions around it, we say, okay, maybe the best thing to do is do 1, 2, 3, let's do 1, 2, 3. Okay, so now it's different because we are really putting the people in perspective at the center of the whole exercise. And we want to make sure that whatever we suggest as solutions actually suits them. they know about it, we take their opinion about it before we start implementing it. So this is the main difference with the like earlier approaches or more traditional approaches. What I love the most about design thinking, and this is why I always talk about design thinking in any kind of entrepreneurship training, is that it starts with empathy. And empathy, in my opinion, is a very important value that anyone who is working with entrepreneurship, not just entrepreneurs, but anyone who is supporting entrepreneurship should put as a priority. So when you talk about empathy, we talk about really putting ourselves in the shoes of other people and understanding their needs inside out. So it's not just about talking to them, it's about also observing them, shadowing them, immersing ourselves in their conditions, in their situation, and definitely interviewing them, meaning having in-depth discussions with them in order to understand their real problems and to not just have a high-level superficial understanding of their needs, but a deep understanding of their needs, as if we know them for a long time. So this is the whole idea of empathy. And as you could see in the process, empathy is always the first thing we do in our design thinking process. Okay, so it comes first. And for me, this is what differentiates design thinking. This is what makes it stronger. And this is what makes it really unique. And this is what brings all the value of design thinking versus the other problem-solving techniques that we are aware of. So again, how do I empathize with necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas? Okay, I have to, first of all, go to them. I have to talk to them. I have to shadow them. I have to immerse myself in their shoes. So for example, whoever is studying this phenomenon and whoever is trying to come up with different solutions that are tailored for these people, they need to spend a long time in these rural areas, stay for maybe a week, okay, and in different rural areas. Talk to these people, not just through a 1-hour discussion, like maybe spend, I don't know, a weekend with them, go to them on different occasions, really understand how they live, of course, after obtaining permission and so on. But this understanding is very important because we don't want to base our solutions on mere assumptions. We want to base them on reality, on evidence, on facts. And the only way to do that is to really have this deep, very deep understanding of how they live, how they interact with their environment, how they think, how they feel, what they do, what they say. And the only way to do this is through empathy. So this is the first and the very important step that we need to do in design thinking. After we do this empathy, again, through these different techniques, we have to sit down and reflect. Again, in a team, hopefully this process is not an individual process. There is a team working on these projects for necessity-driven entrepreneurs. So we put on the table everything we have gathered through this empathy exercise, our reflections, our observations, interesting quotes we got from our discussions and interactions, points of contradiction, something couldn't understand from these necessity-driven entrepreneurs, points that maybe contradicted themselves, because I mean, we are human beings and we are full of contradictions. So we need to highlight these points and sit together as a team who is trying to design the solution. And before we think of solutions, ask ourselves, what is the real problem here? Okay, so we really need to define the problem properly before we get into the solution part of this method. And in order to do that, we have to think of two main questions. Who should we be targeting? And even if we're saying here necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas, we can still break them down into different categories. For example, we can say women who are necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas. We can also break this down further. Instead of just rural areas, we can say Bika, for example. And when you say women, also we have different categories of women. They could be either married or single. They could be married with children or married without children. They could be divorced. So these are different people. And when we do our empathy exercise, we have to make sure that we understand all of these demographic characteristics of these people, because it will differ from a married woman to a non-married woman, a woman with children, women without children, men versus women. Also, it really depends. Okay, we're talking about rural areas, necessity driven, but maybe it depends about also on their background. Are they coming from an agricultural background? Are they educated? Are they not educated? So all of this makes a big difference. And sometimes we have to focus our efforts on a certain category, especially at the beginning, and slowly we can add more categories. So we have to start specific, and this is how we can be more effective in our solutions. And this is where in this problem definition should ask who. Okay, so based on our empathy exercise, on all of our interviews and observations and immersion that we did, who should we be targeting? And who was the persona? So who was the characteristic that we saw most abundantly and really showed at the top of the surface every single time we try to do this? So again, is it the women, for example, married necessity-driven entrepreneur, or is it someone else? So we have to think of who and all the characteristics of the who. Again, we call this a persona. There are many exercises for empathy mapping, we call them, to define our personas. And this is what we should do here at this point. And we should ask the what, okay? So in addition to the who, which is super important, because again, we're doing human-centered design, and the human, which is the who, is at the center of all of this process. And we have the what. So the what is their problem exactly? What are they trying to solve? What's, wrong currently? What is their need, and what are they trying to achieve? Okay. And again, in design thinking, based on the Stanford D School, there are many templates we can use to ask these, what we call the problem statements, write them down, ask what are they trying to achieve? What is their need? What are they lacking currently? And what are they looking forward to achieve? So again, these necessity-driven entrepreneurs, we need, based on our empathy, on our interviews, observations, etc., we need to have specific problem statements, and at the end, we need to choose one of these problem statements and say, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Because no one has a magic wand to solve all the problems of necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas. They might have very different problems, very different needs. So we need to focus on our efforts on one problem at a time. And this is where we define our problem. Again, if you have questions, please write to me in the chat. I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'm trying to do this faster than usual. After I define the problem, again, with my team, and this could be an iterative process, we can be going back and forth to our empathy exercise and so on. This is when I start thinking of solutions and ideas. And I know in Lebanon and in many countries around the world, we are prone to directly start throwing ideas and thinking of ideas as soon as we have a glimpse of the problem. And this is something that, although it's tempting, but we have to try to avoid doing, because when we start directly thinking of solutions at the very early stages, then we are depriving ourselves from the advantage or opportunity of listening from the actual people and doing this empathy and this problem definition exercise properly before we start thinking about solutions. And this is very dangerous. It could have very adversary effects, because ultimately we might implement solutions that are not rooted in the real problem and that do not really serve the people. Okay, they might seem like they do, but in reality they don't. So this is why we have to do empathy and problem definition before ideation. And this is why ideation, again, maybe for some of you it could be counterintuitive, but it's not the first step that we do. It's actually the third step here in design thinking, because we only start rigorously thinking about ideas after we have empathized with the humans who are at the center of our problem, and only after we have defined the problem and decided who exactly we're going to be targeting with our solution. So some tips for ideation, of course, also online, you can find lots of tips for ideation. We always say that quantity is more important than quality at this stage. So again, this is a team exercise. As a team, you sit together and you really have what you call an idea dump. So you just throw ideas, regardless if they are good ideas, if they are feasible ideas, if they are effective ideas. You just throw all kinds of ideas possible, because at this point, what we try to do here is we call it diverge. So we want to come up with the maximum number of ideas, the craziest ideas, the most innovative ideas. Some of our ideas could be based on research and what other people have been doing in similar contexts. So it doesn't all have to be new. So based on research, we do not need to reinvent the wheel again. So also we can really get inspired from other solutions, mix and match and combine, and do all of these kinds of techniques about existing solutions to come up with new ones. And we need to use a participatory approach. So also maybe we can invite one or two necessity-driven entrepreneurs to the table where they can ideate with us, okay? And also tell us about their own ideas. I mean, we do not need to adopt their ideas as they are, but they could participate in this ideation exercise so that we come up with the biggest number of solutions. And after we do that, after we do this divergence exercise, we do what we call the converging exercise. So because we will have some crazy ideas, ideas that cannot be implemented, ideas that are not feasible, ideas that are super costly, we have to narrow down our ideas and to evaluate them based on different criteria. And these criteria will come from the party who is trying to implement the solution. So it will be based maybe on the budget, on the timeline, based on the practicality of things, based on the effectiveness. So we put all of these criteria and we evaluate the different solutions. Some of them will be automatically out because they are like super dreamy, super maybe unrealistic. And some others will have to go through this assessment, whereas we narrow down like maybe 100 solutions that we came up with to only 3. And based on these 3, we also do another kind of evaluation to come up with the best solution. And I always say 3 and not 1, because again, if this solution that I chose at the end didn't work, I have the other 2 that I can come back and try. So it's very important to keep this iterative thinking in mind, because this is at the heart of design thinking. It's not just like I do it once and I'm done. I always have to go back to earlier steps and make sure I do things better. So after I choose this idea that was the winner according to lots of criteria and lots of creativity, we do a prototype, okay? And the prototype, also some people, when we say prototype, you know, they freak out, they get a bit tense about it. Actually, prototyping is very easy. Prototyping is the simplest way and the fastest way to transform a solution from an abstract idea into a tangible form. And it does not need to be functional. It we could have multiple versions of a prototype. We don't always have to have a perfect prototype right away. And the most important part of prototyping is testing. And now we'll talk about testing. So let's say, for example, we decided that we are going to provide some kind of, I don't know, microfinancing solution to these necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas in Lebanon. In order to do that, I don't have to directly put together a full-fledged system for microfinancing, etc. I can simply start out with, you know, 1 or 2 examples where we give a very small amount of money with like a very small agreement, like nothing, you know, sophisticated, and see how this will work. And based on this very small, like trivial prototype, we can note down all kinds of questions that pop up, like how, because again, the process, like when you say, for example, microfinancing, there's a whole process behind it. There are lots of legal issues, lots of, you know, financial considerations, lots of reporting involved, etc. But again, the prototype is just a simple way to just put this into action. And based on the testing that will follow the prototype, I will have an idea of all the questions that need to be asked, all the procedures that need to be followed, all the issues that we faced. And this is why we do prototyping, because we want to be able to find out these issues and problems and challenges quickly, so that we address them quickly, so that we don't put the entire project in danger of failing. So the whole idea of prototyping in a fast way is to increase the chances of success of the project by figuring out any potential challenges very early on, once we start prototyping and testing with the users. And I always like to correlate these last two steps, which are prototyping and testing, because without testing, prototyping has no value, like has zero value. So the whole idea about the prototype is I have to test it with real users. So again, I go back to these real necessity-driven entrepreneurs. I have not just to talk to them, I have to apply this solution on them or ask them to use it, depending on what it is. And I have to observe how they are using it. I have to ask them how they are using it, get their feedback. And the most important idea here is that we learn from this testing in order to iterate. So again, I learned that this wasn't proper because it's a prototype. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be the best, definitely. It's not meant to be the best. So I learned what was wrong, what could be done better. I iterate on that and I test again. So testing, again, is not a one-time thing. It's a repetitive process based, and I go back, I do a better prototype, I come again, I test again, and I keep looping. And when you keep looping, sometimes you have to go back to ideation, for example, and again, select this other runner-up idea because our first idea didn't work. Or I have to go back to empathy sometimes and talk to these people and understand more about certain areas of the problem that I couldn't capture properly. So this is design thinking in a nutshell. It's actually this 5-step process: empathy, definition of the problem, ideation, prototyping, and testing. And here is a recap slide. So in empathy, we have to fully understand the experience of the user. Again, necessity-driven entrepreneurs in rural areas, in our case, for whom we are designing, do this thorough observation, interact, immerse yourself in their experience. So this is very important for the people who are trying to come up with these solutions. We define, how do we define the problem? We need to process and synthesize our findings from the empathy step, and then we have to create a user point of view that we will address with our design. So again, what's the problem they are facing? What should we address very specifically? After we do that, we ideate based on this definition. We explore a wide variety of possible solutions through generating large quantity of diverse possible solutions, allowing us to step beyond the obvious and explore a range of ideas. After we do that, we select the top idea and we prototype it. We transform it into a physical form where users can actually experience and interact with this solution. And in this process, we are developing more empathy through also the testing part. When we try out our prototypes with our users, we observe them, we get their feedback, we learn more about them, and we refine, again, the process, the problem definition, and our idea. So this is it for me for today. I hope this was, a sufficient explanation and description of the design thinking process. And if you have any questions, I'm ready for them. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haitani, for giving us from your time. Thanks for this very interesting introduction to design thinking. And it's as a process from empathizing to testing. So given that you have to leave us early, if anyone has any questions for Dr. Haitani, please write them down in the chat room and we will make sure to pass them to her. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions? Okay. So we will move to the second session with Dr. Nada Khaddaj on recommendations for capacity building initiatives and the labor market. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, LCPS, for to take part in this webinar. I'll start introduction a little bit and then go to recommendations that we shall do whenever we're talking about capacity building. So as we all know, the pandemic has left everyone in a problematic economic situation. But if we want to specifically talk about Lebanon, we all know that Lebanon is really passing in the worst economic situation since the World War II, affected by COVID, monetary issues and corruptions, and many other issues. So definitely this current situation, as we see on the ground, led to the birth of many necessity-driven startups, since youth had no better options for work except having their own ones. Yet these youth were really or are really facing obstacles in how to grow their business, sustain their success, even though sometimes they naturally use the design thinking. They're empathetic to solve certain problems. They have the steps in how to work in their businesses along they test and retest in order to reach their goals. From here, it's very nice to start talking about the capacity building, which is simply the process of developing, strengthening the skills, instincts, abilities, processes, and the resources that these organizations or startups and communities really need to survive in the current fast-changing world. So it is any intervention we just do, or any intervention we as the ecosystem do to enable or to strengthen the organization's ability to fulfill the missions by promoting their sound management through strong governance and persistent dedication to achieve the goals. So as we said, the capacity building is not only the way the tasks are performed, but in my opinion, it's the mindset. So it's the change from within so that we sustain, we can sustain this, the success that we need to reach. So in my opinion, or to ensure such a proper capacity building process, we have to make sure conduct the needs assessment that these youth or these entrepreneurs would need, engage stakeholders on these capacity development, assess capacity needs and assets, formulate and implement capacity development response, as well as reach the evaluation at the end. So whenever we're talking about capacity building, we as trainers or as communities that we want to help or to support startups or youth as well, we shall really be working together as an ecosystem with the local as well communities in order to just like enhance the situation these youth are passing through or they are living. So we shall really prepare proper educational and training opportunities based on the needs that these youth have, develop human resources, enhance knowledge management and networks, and continuously work on improving the governmental, the organizational, and the individual competencies and capabilities of these youth or of the startups that we're having. So simply, it's not like a one-time job. It is a long-term commitment. Having this success in this capacity building is a long-term commitment. It is the creation of solutions with all stakeholders, the local and the international, or anyone who wants to support. It's strengthening the whole ecosystem, supporting the technical as well as the adaptive capabilities in building the strong foundations to ensure that this mindset is there. So it is an intentional and strategic commitment to collaborate with all the community partners in order to strengthen the confidence, increase the knowledge, expand the resources, build the skills, so that these youth are really empowered to be the catalysts in the change that we want to see in our communities. So, and these issues we are really living with our youth daily. They really need the support of the whole ecosystem. It's like not from one side or from one trainer or from one concept. So this mindset that we really want to talk about, the capacity building mindset, it starts by identifying the community strengths and starts by building among them, valuing the local community knowledge as well as the expert knowledge. It seeks the long-term solutions that really underlies or sees what's the cause of the problems they're living, in order to affirm the value of the shared leaderships, the resources, and sustain the change that we and the youth look at. So I love always when talking about capacity building, actually, which is newly born, the late 1990s, the organization started just like building up the capacity building concept. We name it as the ABDC of capacity building, starting by enhancing the adoption. So A stands for adopt the capacity building mindset. What are the opportunities that we can create? What are the current strengths? Because necessity-driven startups are from the strengths that we have. So we have to start from that point. The B goes for broaden the community partners and assess the network of resources, because definitely when we work all together as all partners, we would enhance the status quo of what we're having in our rural areas or in our rural communities. And then the C stands for create a culture of empowerment and shared learning. How can we enhance the new ideas? How can we build according the new ideas? How can this knowledge or a new knowledge help these youth to change or to turn what they have into real habits or into real skills? And the D stands for develop. So develop the structures that really reinforces the new learning and habits. So when adopting, broadening, creating, and developing, we would be just like having the circle complete in the capacity building, just like initiation, development, as well as the sustaining, because we all know that what we seek for is sustained successes and not a one-time success, or not a one-time or not a startup that lasts for like 1 or 2 years. We want a sustained success as well as flourishing organizations. So in short, we can contribute to the capacity building by being mindful and focused on the way which you or us and the community partners can go in the collaborative community work, so the change would really last over time. So it is the mindset that requires really listening and patience and long-term patience. So it is challenging. Yeah, I know sometimes it is really challenging, but the long-term benefits usually outweigh the short-term difficulties. Sometimes you would face challenges in the availability of funding, the support of influencers, the support of the managers, the inclusive representation, or sometimes we don't have everyone just like represented from different genders, from different societies, and all these. So simply, whenever we're talking about capacity building and the labor market in our current situation, we have to go into long, deep conversations. We have to enhance the technology, the innovation. We have to engage all stakeholders on the capacity development, build a strong network of partners at different levels, give the youth as well as the new startups technical support, training, advisory services, specialized expertise. It's not only the equipment or the infrastructure that can sustain the capacity building, but definitely we need to work on other performance improvement steps. So simply starting with training, improving knowledge, building ecosystem that may support these, as well as educative seminars, lectures, conferences, hands-on training, all would end up just like having better labor markets, better targeted labor market, as well as parallel to the ABDC of capacity building, which would after a certain point, regardless of how long this would be, it is not the easy roadmap, but I think it is the proper roadmap that would help us to ensure the success of certain rural startups or of certain new ideas written or found by our entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khadash, for this interesting set of recommendations on capacity building. If anyone has any questions, just please write it down in the chat room, and we'll ask it to Dr. Khadash by the end of this webinar. Okay, so we will move to our third speaker, Laura. who will be giving us some recommendations on leadership, development, and innovation that NDEs can benefit from, and rural local policymakers that can benefit from to support the NDEs in rural areas. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lina, for the introduction. So first of all, my name is Laura Debian. As mentioned, I'm the program manager at Rural Entrepreneurs. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. First of all, I'm going to introduce you a little bit about rural entrepreneurs. So rural entrepreneurs envisions dynamic, prosperous, and innovative rural communities that support, inspire, and empower youth, women, and underprivileged people to build on their competences and create a better future. Rural entrepreneurs works to widen the prospect of employment in rural areas and enhance the capacity and the chances of youth and women to grow, innovate, and contribute to the social economic development of their local communities. So RE activities are designed to foster and promote entrepreneurial mindset and education, build and improve youth and women capacity to innovate, mentor and support private initiatives, entrepreneurs and startups, improve access to productive resources and funding resources. So I'll do a little bit brief about our programs at Rural Entrepreneurs. So first of all, let's start with the GIL program, Generation of Innovation Leaders. This program is powered by UNICEF Lebanon. GIL aims to address unemployment among marginalized youth in Lebanon by building their entrepreneurial and digital capacities to improve their access to income generating activities and employment opportunities. Also, we have the SU project. This project is powered by the UNDP. The project aims to provide immediate assistance for vulnerable households in rural areas and support MSMEs through a series of cash work activities. The Navigating Entrepreneurship program, which is a program raise awareness on the value and importance of entrepreneurship in today's workplace and equip high school students mainly all over Lebanon with the proper mindset and tools to approach the problems in innovative ways. Also, we have the Fresh Start program, which was funded by the USAID to help and to support the enterprises who were damaged by the Beirut port explosion. Also, we have the Together program. This program was led by the ACS. The project aims to foster inclusive economic and social development in Shuf area, as well as the MAVA Rural Entrepreneur Support Program. This program aims to support rural entrepreneurs in Lebanon in promoting sustainable land use practices. So let's go to the main reason why we are here today, which is the recommendations. First of all, let's talk about the leadership context. First of all, so in the face of the significant changes in the social, technological, economic, and political environments worldwide, many organizations are examining how they prepare their leaders for working through disruption and uncertainty. So in a world within which the complexity maybe of running organizations in the 21st century challenges tried and tested models of leadership and disruption of whole industry is either a reality or an ever-present cloud in the contemporary business landscape, helping leaders maybe to cope, perform, and shape the organization has become an acute and necessary challenge. So those who are charged with this task are having to review the fundamentals of what they do and engaged with these profound changes. So here comes the changes. These changes greatly impact the providers of leadership development as well as the companies themselves. So there are plenty of headline examples of the abject failure of leadership in organizations. So these dramatic examples should not be allowed to overshadow the less maybe spectacular day-to-day underperformance of leaders and the consequent loss of revenue, opportunity, and the draining away of key talent. So there is a misalignment between the who, what, and how of leadership development. So it is locked as it is into obsolete but enduring philosophies around what constitutes leadership. So here is the important integration steps and new models of leadership development to enable maybe a new approach and culture where leadership can excel and organization flourish through change. So here, let's talk more about some recommendations for successfully implementing the innovation. First of all, let's talk about designing processes to match the type of innovation required. We should ask ourselves, what are you trying to do? Do you need to come up with maybe startlingly new and different ideas, or do you have to develop the seed of an idea into something useful and workable? So clearly, both phases are necessary elements of innovation, but it is important to understand what you want to achieve and then apply the appropriate approaches. So idea generation is, by its nature, more understructured, but systems and processes can help this to create better results. So here comes the second point, which is create structure to access and coordinate top talents. So you need to create structure that allows diverse groups to collaborate on projects. Leadership is critical, both in maybe in establishing the structure for the innovation process and often in running the project. So every successful project had a combination of a good leader or maybe leadership team and straightforward the processes. So the less that it is distributed innovation team depends on an individual, usually working largely by force of personality. So the more that clear structures and processes are required. Also, let's talk about negotiation based on maybe differing objectives, risk, appetite, and power. So here the reality is that in any negotiation that we face in our entire life, the primary variable is relative power, which is basically how much one party needs the other. And last but not least is be open throughout the process. So trust is invaluable, but transparency can be almost as good. So now we all know that there is no arguing that in maybe today's marketplace, companies or organizations and leaders must innovate to survive. So there is more pressure now than at any time in history of innovation, especially if companies want to be maybe industry leaders or at the top organizations in Lebanon or in the world. So this is because rapidly changing technology is continually driving changes in markets and shifting trends in customer behavior and expectations. So the most effective way to stay competitive is to make the innovation a habit throughout the organization or throughout your team, maybe. So innovation should be an initiative that all departments share, and maybe it must be driven by leaders in order to create staying power. So how can you make your leaders more innovative? What's the best way? It takes more than just maybe a training, as Ms. Nada said before. It's a mixture of maybe soft skills, mentoring, cultural dedication to the practice, consistency, and reinforcement. So let's talk more about some leadership team master innovation recommendations. So first of all, let's mention, help your team develop self-awareness. Why? Ask why. Because self-awareness allows people to better understand how and where they best perform. When it comes to innovation, there are several stages, as mentioned as well in the first section: identify, define, develop, verify, deploy, scale. So all these steps, once people understand their talents, once people understand their skill, the passion they have, they will be able to certain where they best fit in these stages. Also, we have to take risks. Encourage our leaders to be correct in their efforts and ideas. Create an environment where taking risks and learning through failure are a commonplace. It's fine to fail sometimes. So nobody takes risks for the sake of taking risks. People typically take risks because they are trying to learn, do or prove something. So make that a behavior that everyone considers ideal behavior. Also support their intellectual growth. Urge your leaders to learn. Encourage your leaders to read books, articles, attend training, help them outline a course of study or a series of thought leaders to follow. Work on intellectual exercises together as a team or sub-teams. Assign topics members to study, present to your team members. So there'll be a way to support their growth as well. Also encourage them to embrace creativity. We all know that creativity comes in various forms. So it's only it's not only an artistic expression. Creativity is simply turning imagination into something real. It is seeing things from a different point of view, finding connections between ideas and generating solutions to problems or to opportunities that we face in our daily lives. So it is easy to see why creativity is essential for innovation. The truth is that every one of us has potential for creativity, but we often prohibit creative thought because we fear results and judgment. So be creative. And last but not least, challenge them to develop an innovation system. Innovation does not just happen by chance. It requires a structure. An innovation system is a methodology. It is needed to think through problems and to ask the necessary question along the way. It will be different for every leader, but we all think differently and approach problems from various angles. But regardless of how you look at it, you must systemize it. So in short, I'm ending up my session for today by one sentence: leadership
in order to get their support, to see who are the youth that are really in need. And at that point, we realized that there is a real gap in the local municipalities, local governmental bodies, that they don't have even the statistics or even this Excel sheet showing us the real needs of youth at their villages. And the villages are not like that huge villages. I can say, for example, Jbail and the electricity issues of Jbail, even though I don't know that closely, but I know that there is a certain opportunity just to to have the electricity 24/7. But unfortunately, I cannot give you a concrete example that I lived with from the experience that we are living. We don't have that to study the if you want what's going on in the villages, and this is where we have to start from adopting this capacity building mindset. And this starts from really knowing what are the needs of our youth, what are the strengths of our communities, and start from that point. So I don't know why I'm a university professor as well, but at a certain point my students are graduating without knowing where do they want to work, or without knowing if they really love what they're studying or not. And we end up having difference or a huge difference between the supply and demand, and we end up having the youth, they're not knowing where to go. And this starts from the lack of proper capacity building programs from the whole ecosystems, from the local municipalities until the governmental, until also including we as mentors or as trainers or as And this is why I think having such programs as the Tafawuq program, which we are implementing at Nawaya, we are really realizing the needs of these youth, and we are really realizing that these youth are very successful if they are empowered properly in the soft skills as well as the know-how to implement what they really love to be working. And we are witnessing certain successes and certain innovative startups. Sometimes they really exceed our expectations. Sometimes they are graduates, sometimes they are not, but we need such issues starting from the municipality would have half of the work that we are doing done. We cannot just like know what's the need of a village that is really rural from my place to just empower youth there. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope I did.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Nada. If Laura has an example about that, perhaps she can answer this question. And if you have any other questions, please share them in the chat room. Okay. So thank you everyone for taking part in this webinar. I thank our speakers and the participants, and we look forward to having you with us on board in any upcoming events. Thank you so much.